As a fan of long-running game development studios, it's sometimes hard to see them lose their footing as industry pioneers. For Intelligent Systems, this couldn't be further from the truth. After a string of questionable titles like Paper Mario Color Splash, codenamed Steam, and to a more polarizing extent, Fire Emblem Fates, it felt like the famed developer had lost sight of what made their output so appealing in the first place. Though following 2017's well-received Fire Emblem Echoes, fans have been excited to experience Intelligent Systems' first strategy RPG home console offering since over a decade, with Fire Emblem Three Houses. And from here it begs the question on whether or not it sparks a return to form, or if it's a completely unnecessary diversion for the series. This is Matt from New Game Plus, and welcome to our Fire Emblem Three Houses review. Setting the scene, you fill the role of a mercenary tasked with routing enemies from a squad of disciples serving at Garreg Monastery. You soon learn they hail from an academy hosted on-site and tucked away within the mountains of Central Fodlan, a gigantic continent whose land is divided into three separate nations. As they lead you there, you find that each student represents a nation and a house, hence the Three Houses tagline, and from there, they urge you to teach them the ways of war and diplomacy as their professor. One thing that stands out is the way the game is presented. Three Houses really pulls out all the stops to achieve an aesthetic fitting of Germanic nobility. Everything from the design of the monastery to the gorgeous murals that grace each chapter cutscene is absolutely ace. The CGI isn't too bad here either. If you've seen any anime in the last decade, such as the Golden Age arc movies of Berserk, it has a very similar look and tone to that. However, anything that's rendered in real time is a little bit of a mixed bag. If you play the game in handheld mode, be prepared for some slightly muddy textures and weird character model rendering due to the poor resolution. However, dock mode fares much better, but frame rate can take dips when the action gets a little too hectic. Thankfully, with Three Houses being a strategy RPG, this doesn't really affect the overall experience as much as if this was a game occurring in real time. If you can ignore some of these slight shortcomings, the character design really shines through. Both in appearance and personality, students within each house have widely differing motivations and views, accentuated through support conversations. It's great that Intelligent Systems has taken the chance to pepper most exchanges with really interesting dialogue topics relevant to the themes of the game, instead of really sterile flavor text than what you get in Fire Emblem Fates. For example, characters converse about loyalty to one another and their respective nations, mercenaries working under religious grounds despite harboring secular views, and the list goes on. One personal favourite of mine is a character called Petra, a foreign student who primarily joins the academy as means of relieving political tension between her homeland and those who inhabit Central Fodlan. Her slight language barrier and precarious position makes her journey a fantastic one to see through to the end. It's shining moments like these in Three Houses that give the player enough incentive to invest in their development and explore them, rather than just dismissing them as units devoid of any characterization or respect. As for how the game actually plays, the setting implies some huge changes for how you proceed in Three Houses. In most Fire Emblem games, progression is generally of a linear fashion, save for a few extra optional chapters. Three Houses shakes things up to a considerable degree, almost just as much as Fire Emblem Gaiden had done, and this is achieved through a number of ways. Most notably, systems like the Weapon Triangle and the Trinity of Magic is reworked to favour skill grades, and abilities that can be learned and equipped by levelling up said skills. Though the biggest rework is the game's format, following a Gregorian-style calendar. At the end of each in-game month, the player is assigned a major plot point specific quest to complete. The entire month leading up to that quest can be spent any way the character wants, allowing a level of freedom you don't usually get in most mainline Fire Emblem games. If I were to compare this to other games currently out on the market, expect time management similar to the Persona series or even Final Fantasy Type 0. Once you select a house of students as their professor, you can spend time in between classes by exploring the monastery, engaging in minigames, and completing quests to raise rapport with faculty staff or motivating students so they perform better during study periods. In addition, you can also take part in battles to grind for experience, or even attend seminars for specialty training. Though while the game stresses heavily that you should focus on the growth of your students, trying to reach that balance between leveling them and yourself is what makes the brunt of the challenge in Three Houses. Your main avatar is a unit themselves, and by extension shares the same resource meter that your students can use to skill and level up. And the real thrill outside of battle is trying to find the most optimized path that you can take leading up to each month's big fight, or in a worst case scenario, deciding whether or not you should fit in that extra sword lesson for yourself, or ensure that your students are highly motivated to get the most out of their next lecture. For the player that loves micromanagement, they will find a lot to adore here. Though when it comes down to brass tacks, what is a Fire Emblem game without the combat? What you get here is a pretty good mix of classic Fire Emblem gameplay with a fresh coat of paint, and a host of complementary systems that sets itself apart from previous installments. Aside from standard attacks, abilities such as combat arts and gambits allow for better positioning or leverage for each unit. And it is safe to say that there is a combat art for almost every single situation. For example, if you need to pick Pegasus Knights off from an impossible angle, use a curved bow shot for better range at the cost of your hit rate. Or, if you're facing off against a knight with an obvious high defense advantage, use a Helm Splitter art that shatters armor-based enemies at the cost of your weapon durability, and the list goes on. Gambits are also important for congested groups of units or larger enemies in a game that can occupy more than one tile of space at a given time. They're absolutely essential to ensure the safety of all of your units. Larger enemies generally have multiple health bars and defensive parameters that require them to be attacked from all sides to trigger a stagger motion. Instead of having to attack each enemy once at a time, Gambits serve as a neat and appropriate crowd clearing maneuver for when the situation calls. While most of these features are indeed quite welcome, there are some additions that make the game feel perhaps a little too cozy, even while playing on classic mode. A rewind mechanic called Divine Pulse allows you to head back to any point in time within a mission down to the most intricate of individual unit movements and actions. While it starts as a very limited resource, it scales ridiculously, leaving you with up to about 8 charges as your character levels up. While there are some very story and spoiler heavy reasons why this mechanic exists, it definitely feels like the difficulty scaling wasn't tested too thoroughly to begin with. Though upon release, developers Koei Tecmo and Intelligent Systems have confirmed that there will be extra difficulties patched in, so if you need to wait a little bit longer for a more hardcore Fire Emblem fix, stay tuned. Since we're on a bit of a negative streak, there are a few problems plaguing Three Houses from being truly excellent. Pacing can be a real pain in the neck depending on what you're expecting from most Fire Emblem games. While Three Houses is by no means a short game, as each run will last you comfortably over the 50-hour mark, there's a lot of filler to sift through before the main plot gets to the point. In all of that off time spent playing optional quests and grinding out your units, be prepared to see the same map designs over and over again, with a lack of mission objective variety, and it really hurts the game on multiple playthroughs. Don't be too surprised if you play most missions on muscle memory, regardless if you're underleveled or overleveled for the occasion. Apart from that, Fire Emblem Three Houses is quite the experiment, and it is one that pays off well for the most part. Distancing itself from games like Fates and Awakening, Three Houses manages to shake up core gameplay elements that have stuck with the series for over a quarter of a century, and still manages to contain what makes a Fire Emblem game a Fire Emblem game. Stuff like tight, intimate maps with intricate unit management that can sustain even the pickiest of strategy enthusiasts. And yes, while it might not stick to landing in every spot, Fire Emblem Three Houses genuinely feels like a game Intelligent Systems and Koei Tecmo wanted to make, rather than what they felt obligated to make. Have you given the game a crack for yourself? Loving it or hating it? Be sure to like, comment on this video, and subscribe to us here at youtube.com/NewGamePlusTV to help quench your thirst for RPG content. Thanks for watching.